Kadosh Boker Or Masechet Nazir Daf Samach Daled Amud Aleph 64a1. We were trying to find out the entire concept of that if a person came and he did tevilah, and there was tum'ah which was floating on the water, and there's a safek if it touched tarot or not. We said it's not going to be mitamiyah to do with the sheretz, because we said safek tum'ah which is safa, right? Ben bekelim and bekarka teorah. Rabbi Shimon says bekelim it's going to be tamiyah, but bekarka it's going to be tehorah. Ask the Gemara and Samach Daled Amud Aleph on the top. My Tama, the Tanakama, what's the reasoning of the Tanakama that he holds? Safek maga'a of tum'ah, which it's safa, it's going to be tehorah, which means that if you have right now safek, right, that you touched tum'ah, which is floating on the water, it's going to be tahor, whether it's going to be in the karka or in the kelim. It's written, Al teshekzu l'shotechem b'chol hasheretz hashoretz. B'chol makom shu shoretz. Doesn't matter any place where it's fitting to be a creepy crawler, which means that even if it's going to be tzaf al pri hamayim, it's going to be the same halacha. Uchtiv, and it's written, v'zeh lachem atamim b'sheretz hashoretz ala haaretz. Right? How could it be then? Does it have to be ala haaretz v'lo ala mayim, or even anywhere? So haketz v'day magao tameh. If it's going to be for sure the maga, right? So then it's going to be tameh safek magao. But if it's going to be safek magao, right, it's not going to be tameh, it's going to be tahor. Rabbi Shimon, according to Shitat Rabbi Shimon, my tama, what's the reasoning why, right, does he hold, right, that safek magao of a sheretz tahor is only going to be when it's on the mayim shebakarka? Amar Ula says, it's written, ach mayanu voru mikveh mayim tahor. So it's mashma, and it's written, v'nogea b'nivlatam yitma adarev. Hakit said, how do you put them both together? So he says, if it's safa bekelim, if it's going to be on the kelim, right? So therefore what? It's going to be tameh, right? And that's what we're learning when it says, ach mayanu voru mikveh mayim tahor. So it's mashma that if it's going to be on a memayano board, it's not going to be tameh. But when it's written, right, bekarka, it's going to be tahor. That was the first pasuk. Okay? So therefore, tahor is tahor, right? Is tum'ah. How does it work? So he says, if it's going to be in kelim, tameh, karka tahor. Tanu Rabbanan, we learned in the Braita, kol anitalin v'anigrarim, any shratzim or tum'ah, which could be taken in the hands of a human being, or that you could drag it. For example, you took a sheretz, whatever it is, and you were dragging it. Sfekan tameh. But it's considered that they are laying, and it's not that it's safa. Okay, that means basically since they're in your hand, it's like you have in your hand. It's not like it's just floating somewhere. Hanizrakim, but if it's thrown in the air, sfekan tahor, it's going to be safek tahor. Chutz min kazai min hamet, except for the kazai min hamet v'melin l'pnei hatumah v'chol dovar shemitameh milmal al-mata. La'atuye, which come to include azav ve'azavah, or anything which is like them, which means any mitamim is safek. Even if the tumah is safa, the same halacha would apply, right? Not only by shratzim, because shratzim is only b'maga. It's only if you touch it, and therefore it's not going to be tahor b'safek tumah b'tzafa ela b'tumat maga, which is by a sheretz. So by Rabbi Chama comes and he asks the following question: Met b'kli. What happens if you have a deceased person that he's inside a utensil? The whole inside of a utensil. It could be a box. It could be anything. Yeah. Ukli tzaf al pnei hamayim. Or you have a utensil which is floating on the water. Ma, what's halacha? Is that considered the met of? Is that considered like tumat safa, that it's floating or not? So batar kliyas, do we go after the utensil, and the utensil is saf al pnei hamayim, it's floating on the water? Or batar mitaz, do we go after the death? Now the death, the deceased himself, right, is inside of a kli. He's not on the. Meaning, what do we look like? What do we look for? The utensil. So the utensil is floating on the water. Because the deceased was inside the utensil. The utensil is floating on the water. So do I say that it's floating on the water? So therefore it's going to be the tum'ah that is floating on the water. Or do I say, no, that right now the deceased is in the utensil. Therefore it's going to be tameh. Right? And it's not considered tum'ah which is floating on the water. So imtin salomar, if you're going to tell me now, that we don't go after the utensil, met al gabe sheretz, if the met is on top of a sheretz, and the sheretz is floating on the water. Ma'u what's halacha? Kevan dehai tumat erev vehai tumat shiv'ah. Since a sheretz, if you become tameh with the tumat sheretz, you only have to do tumat erev. What does that mean? you go to the mikveh, and then in the nighttime you're already pure. That's called tumat erev. But to do with a deceased person, it's tumat shiva. It's 7 days, right? That you have to sprinkle the waters of the paraduma on you on the 3rd and 7th day. So keman demachta tum'a b'kli damya. So it's like consider that you have a tum'ah on top of a utensil, or dilma, or maybe tum'ah semichtahi. Both of them is considered like a tum'ah, which is thick, and therefore it's floating on the water. And therefore the met also has a din of tum'ah shetzafa, that it's floating. So v'imtin somar naiv, you're going to tell me keman demachta tum'ah b'kli damya, that it's like we're talking about that the tum'ah is going to be on a utensil, right? Vadai tameh, and therefore tum'ah in a kli is not nechshevet tumat safa. So then sheretz al gabe nevela. When you have sheretz, which is going to be on top of a nevela, the nevela tzafa, and the nevela is going to be tzafa. Ma'u what's halacha? Kevan detarvayu, since both of them tumat erev inun, it's tumat erev, tumat semichtahi. It's considered tumat semichtahi, like a thick tum'ah, and therefore it's considered that it's floating on the water. Well, dilmar maybe high kezai vai kadasha. Remember that tumat met always needs a measurement of a kezait, and tumat sheretz is always like an adasha, so it's not the same thing. So you can't consider it one body. Meaning, even though the deceased is on top of the sheretz, it's got two intrinsically different halachot. So I cannot say the met is on the sheretz is on the water, it's considered floating. I can't do that.
So the met, you need a kezait.
Says the Gemara, sheretz al gabe sheretz ma'u. So even if you're going to tell me that you can't compare when the deceased is on top of the nevela, on top of the sheretz, what about when you have a case of a sheretz on top of another sheretz? Ma'u, what's halacha? Hani vadai chat shiur aninu. Are you going to tell me that for sure it's the same shiur? The sheretz and sheretz is kadasha kadasha. Or dilmar, maybe you're going to tell me kim the mafsekim adadi, since there's like a pasek between them, because there are two different bodies. Lo, you cannot compare both of them together. The imtim sobar nev, you're going to tell me sheretz gabe sheretz kim the mafsekim adadi, since there are two different bodies. Keman de mancha b'kli dami, it's considered like it's in a utensil. So sheretz al gabe nevela sheni mocha mahu. What about when you have a sheretz on top of a nevela? Remember, a nevela is a kosher animal that became a nevela that was not done proper shechita. Given the nimocha, since it became like ruined, right? It's like it became like when it's mitnames. How do you say mitnames? It's like it melts, right, in a melting form. Given the nimocha aviale kemashke, it's like a liquid. Or dilmar, maybe hayuchlahu. At the end of the day, it's like a food. That means even this nevela is considered a food, and therefore it's a chatzitza between the sheretz and the water, and therefore it's not going to be a tum'ah, which is safa al pnei hamayim. The intim tzalamarna, if you're going to tell me now the uchlahu that it's considered food, sheretz al gaben shichvat zera ma'u. What happens if you have sheretz which is found on top of a shichvat zera? The intim tzalomar, what does that mean? Does the shichvat zera, which is also mitamea, is that a pasek between the mayim, the water, right, and the sheretz, right? Because at the end of the day, shichvat zera is a liquid. The imtim tzalomar, if you're going to tell me once the shichvat zera came out of the body, it's like a food, it's right, and therefore it's a chatzitza. Sheretz al gabe mechatat. What happens if you have sheretz on top of the waters of a chatat, right? Or mechatat safin al gabe mayim, or you have mechatat on top of water. What's the halacha? Is that considered that it's like there's going to be tzafa, right? Or is it considered no, that it's not tzafa al pnei mayim? So says the Gemara, lo yadina, we do not know, right? And therefore teku, we don't have an answer. So in all these questions, we don't have an answer. So Samagdala Damubet 64b. Amar Rav Hamnuna. So we just finished with a teku. We don't know the answer to all these questions. Amar Rav Hamnuna. Rav Hamnuna says Nazir v'oseh Pesach shalchu bekever hatahom. Imagine a person that's going and he's a Nazir, right? Or a person that's going to do the Korban Pesach, and they were both tmemet. Shalchu bekever hatahom, that they pass by a kever atehom, right? Which means that they do not know where the kever is. That's why it's called the bis, the tehom. On the 7th day of their purifying process, Teorim, they're going to be pure, which means the Nazir does not soter Naziruton. The one that's doing the Korban Pesach, he could bring his Korban Pesach. He doesn't have to bring another Korban for Pesach Sheni, right? Even though for sure they became Tamemeh. My time out's reasoning. Because the Tumat Tom does not have the power to be soter Nazirut or the Korban Pesach that a person brought. That means it doesn't happen. It was buried that nobody knows about it. Right? It's like somewhere that's no.
It's just a question
we don't know. We don't know what it is.
Is it specific to Korban Pesach, or is it true with any Korban?
That's what we're saying. Korban Pesach is the most important. Yeah. Mativ Rava, so Rava comes and he asks the following question. Imagine a person comes and he goes down to do tevilah in a me'ara to purify himself from tumat met. So he said, what happens? And then he has to do the gendim in Nazirut. And after he finishes the Nazirut, he realized that in the me'ara there was a tumat te'om. Meaning in the me'ara there was somebody that was dead, right? Tameh, he's going to be tameh. Shechizkat tameh, tameh chizkat hartor. Because basically we put you on the previous chazakah. You have a chazakah, status quo. So whatever you had the chazakah on, that's your status quo. So says the Gemara, Elmaleh, he says, Modina lecha, I'm going to be modet lecha, benazir shemechusar tiglachat. To do the nazir, which is lacking a tiglachat, which means that he still didn't come and take off his hair, right? And even if he's going to do tevilah and everything, right? He says, I didn't say it's not going to be soter, only in a case, right, that it's going to be after he did the tevilah and also took off his hair. Right? Why? Because since it wasn't Erev Shemesh, Yom Shvi, there's no cheskat tumah anymore. So Elmaleh Rava comes and he said, I'm also going to be modet to you in a case of Oseh Pesach. Because once a person came and he did the Korban Pesach, right, and after he brought the Korban Pesach, now you have a Tumat Te'om, there's nothing lacking, right, Li'itaher. Because you already did the Haza'ah, you did the sprinkling of the Paraduma. So if you became Tumat, Tameh, you don't have to bring a Korban Pesach Sheni. So I also agree with you in that case. So Elmaleh Abaye says, you still need head of Shemesh. Remember, head of Shemesh means that you do Tevilah, and then in the nighttime you become pure. So Elmaleh says, no, the Shemesh is something mimila, it comes on its own. You don't have to do an action, because the sun goes down on its own, so you don't have to do anything. And also even Abaye retracted, the time was learned to the right, Yom Melot Tavi. If it's going to be within the days of the Tara, which means Yom Melot, we're talking about within the 80 days, right? The 81st days after the Lidah. So you have to bring another Korban because of that Palah. But if it's Toch Melot, if it's within the 80 days, you do not have to bring another Korban. So Yachol Lo Tavi, I would have thought to say that you do not have to bring a Lidah Lifnei Milot on a birth which is before the Melot. Aval Tavi a Lidah Shelachar Melot, you do have to bring a Lidah on after Melot. Everyone understood what happened. Basically, what happened is that if a woman is still going to be, we're talking about a Korban Yoledet. A woman had a Nekivah, right? She had a female, she had a girl, and then she became pregnant during her pure days, right? Within the 80 days. And then she had a Hapalah. She had a miscarriage of the fetus. So imagine, she just gave birth to a baby girl. Nowadays, it's very, very highly unlikely, because anyway, by the time she goes to the mikveh, it's usually a month and a half afterwards anyway, but in the olden days, remember the way that it was is that after 2 weeks for a girl, even if she continues bleeding, she's pure. That's the way it was according to the Torah. So therefore, imagine right after 2 weeks, she had relations, she became pregnant immediately. Yeah, it happens. Sometimes even nowadays, even after a month, she becomes pregnant immediately. Right? Let's say she wasn't feeding or she didn't have good milk, she became pregnant immediately. And then she had a miscarriage within the 80 days. Because remember, the way that it works for a girl is that you do 80 days. How do you do 80 days? 2 weeks of impurity, which is 14 days, and then 66 days of pure blood. That even if she's bleeding, it's pure blood. So if she's within the 80 days, right, does she have to bring another korban for the apalah, or the same korban suffices for both? The same sacrifice. Remember that a woman that's a yoledet, she brings a korban, right? So does she have to bring another korban or not? So it says, if it's toch melot within the 80 days, she doesn't have to bring another korban. If it's going to be after melot, she does have to. So I would have thought to say that you should not bring a korban, an extra korban, on a birth which is within the 80 days, but you would bring on after the 80 days. If it's on the same day of the Tara or afterwards, you have to bring another korban. But if it's within the 80 days, you do not have to bring another korban. So therefore, you see from here, right, that on this, it comes out that Abaye retracted from he thought. And he says that we do not have, a Tvul Yom does not have a cheskat, right? He retracted that he says that a Tvul Yom does not have a cheskat Tara. It's not true. So he says, Rav Kana says, Shana here is different than a chasra korban. A korban is not Erev Shemesh. Erev Shemesh, you don't have to do anything. All you need is the sun to set. And then you're pure. It's a different halacha. Here you have to bring a korban. Bringing a korban is completely different. So says the Gemara, Hatam nami michasa v'shemesh. So you need a shemesh. Elmaleh answered, Elmaleh answers him, Shimsham milarva. The shemesh just goes down immediately on its own. You don't have to do anything. So since you don't have to do anything, so therefore it's going to be okay. We continue with the Mishnah.